All right, good afternoon, everybody. So, this is a recording of our program Buzzing with Spongy Moth. This program was originally offered in early to mid March. Part of the reason that you're not hearing the live program is because unfortunately that recording did not sound very good and it just wasn't up to the standard that I would like. So, I'm going to go ahead and record this one just on my own so you can all hear the same information that everybody else got. So this insect represents a major issue in our states, and I want to make sure that you are as informed as you can be about what different state apparatus and what Purdue University is doing about this insect. Now, for those of you who are unaware, my name is Bob Bruner. I am the exotic forest pest educator with the Department of Entomology on Purdue University's campus. A lot of my work has to do with urban forestry, which is exactly the kind of areas that we would expect to find spongy moth. This is an insect with a long history, and it's had a few different names, and I want to make sure that we understand where we're coming from with it. So in the past, this insect was actually referred to the name gypsy moth. That's the only time you're going to hear me use that term. The reason for that is that unfortunately in the past, this term has been used as a slur against different groups of people, and we as entomologists came together under the Better Common Names Project to rename a lot of insects that had names that were used to denigrate or carry derogatory or pejorative terminology. And we're going through and just slowly changing as many of them as we can as we find them. There are a lot of common names to a lot of different insects, so it's a lot of work to do. But spongy moth is a really big victory because this is an invasive pest. People know about it, they're going to be talking about it, and we want to do better. So why don't we get to how this insect originally got here? This one has actually been around for a very long time. This is not a new insect to the environment in North America, unfortunately. So it originally arrived here from Europe. It is a native of Europe, and it was brought here originally as breeding stock. A lithographer and amateur entomologist by the name of Etienne Leopold Trevelot, hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly, wanted to try to create a silk moth hybrid that could be used in the Western world. He put them in a controlled environment, but unfortunately he was kind of an eternal optimist apparently, and did not plan for the inevitable escapes that were going to happen. The moth escaped out, and it stayed in New England for a very long time, and it was actually very tightly controlled and restricted in that area because the infestations were so bad. So why don't we get to kind of the crux of what this insect is? A lot of folks have a lot of assumptions about it, and there are a lot of lookalikes, and we want to make sure that we're all on the same page with it. So first off, this is a moth. It is a part of an order called Lepidoptera. It's related to other moths and butterflies. You will hear people say it belongs to a family of moths called Erebidae, but it has been reclassified several times for those of you who are bug aficionados. So it may move around again in the future. Like all other moths, this is an example of an insect with complete metamorphosis, so its life cycle will involve an egg, a caterpillar, it will form a chrysalis eventually, and it will hatch out from that chrysalis in its adult form. It is important to keep in mind, though, that the damaging stage of this insect is the caterpillar. The adults are non-feeding. They do not have mouthparts. They do not have much in the way of a digestive tract that is atrophied at this point, or it's vestigial rather. And of course, they are invasive, and they will attack several different kinds of host plants, trees in particular, across North America and in Indiana. So why don't we just start rolling through how we identify the different life stages of this insect. And let's start with the adult. The adults are actually kind of interesting. They represent an example of what we refer to as sexual dimorphism, where the two sexes have distinct, unique traits that separate them. They don't look the same, they don't act the same. So like I said, the spongy moth adults, they're not feeding. They're only going to live long enough to mate. The females are going to be non-flying. They have wings, but they will not fly. What they will do is they'll produce a pheromone, or a chemical message meant to communicate a message from one organism to another. And that pheromone will attract all the flighted males, so that way they can get a mate to come to them. Females are going to be lighter in color. They're going to have that creamy appearance like you saw in the previous image. And they're going to have those V-shaped markings on their wings. Let me go back to the previous image to show you. So you can see these V-shaped markings on the wings here. We typically refer to these as chevrons when we're talking about them. And you'll see these traits on males too, but they're much less obvious. Now, males are going to be smaller and darker, and they're going to have more mottled gray and brown colors on them. However, the thing that really sets them apart is that males are going to have very, very feathery antennae that kind of resemble bat ears. Those antennae are used to detect that chemical message that the female is sending out. There are little pores on the antennas that are specifically designed to take in that chemical molecule and detect them. Whereas the females, they're going to be bigger, they're going to be lighter, like I said, they retain their wings, but they do not fly. Now, this is important because oftentimes you will find flying spongy moth outside of infestation areas, and people may panic thinking, I have spongy moth. But in reality, they just have males that are flying, and they may not yet have an infestation, but regardless, it's still important to report it when you see it. So if we move to our larvae, this is kind of the business point of the spongy moth. These are going to be the damaging stage of life for these insects. So what we have here are larvae that have chewing mouth parts that are able to completely defoliate trees at an alarming rate. They're going to have a mottled appearance with fringes of hair along their bodies. Eventually, as they develop, they will get blue and red bumps. These colors and this fringe of hair makes them very readily identifiable. There aren't many caterpillars that are going to resemble this, that are going to be doing the same thing. So they're fairly easy to identify when you see them. They also have a tendency to move up and down the trunks of trees at regular intervals, therefore offering a control measure because they're trying to escape temperature differences. So that as they move up and down those trunks, there's actually a control strategy we use called banding that will help capture them. And I'm going to describe that a little later. Another trait these caterpillars have is that they are capable of distributing themselves through the environment through ballooning. So if there are too many caterpillars on a given tree, those caterpillars are going to spin a tiny thread of silk out of salivary glands in their mouths, essentially. And they're going to hold on to that wisp of silk and let the breeze catch it. And it's referred to as ballooning, where they'll just balloon over to the next nearest tree or wherever the wind takes them and begin to make a new infestation on another tree. However, unlike a lot of caterpillars of various moth species, they don't build structural webbing. They don't make nests. They don't cover cocoons in webbing. This is the only time they use it. Now, we refer to these as spongy moths for a really, really good reason. The egg masses of spongy moth look exactly like that. They look like sponge. You're going to see them stuck to the sides of trees, under vehicles. I've seen pictures of them being inside the tailpipes of cars. You could find them under the eaves of houses, just about anything that is sitting still long enough for the female to lay eggs on. Of interesting note, a lot of the holes you see in these masses here aren't necessarily spongy moth that have hatched. These may actually be made by parasites. So this is, of course, the source of the common name. You can see that spongy mass that covers those eggs. These will adhere to potential hosts in lots of other places, and they're going to overwinter and spend about 8 or 9 months as an egg in that mass. So that is a lot of time out of the year where they are just sitting there as an egg. You could start looking for those egg masses right between July and April. That's going to be the time when they're doing their most overwintering. Now, if we go over the life cycle real quick using this just nice diagram from Ohio's Department of Agriculture, let's start with the eggs here, where they begin to appear. Now, they mark down that egg masses can appear from September onwards. They can appear as early as July, depending on how successful the insect is. You're probably going to be more commonly finding them in September. They're going to last all the way through April, at which point they're going to hatch out into the tiny caterpillars that are slowly going to grow as they defoliate trees. Eventually, as June becomes July, they're going to start pupating, forming a naked chrysalis that you can find. And after that point, they're going to hatch out as adults, either males or females, and begin laying eggs, starting that cycle all over again. And this just kind of outlines it a little bit more. So larvae are going to have 5 to 6 instars, so that is the amount of time in between molts where the larva sheds its skin to grow bigger. So males are going to have 5 instars, whereas females are going to take an extra instar to develop further. And then pupation is going to start, and hatching is going to carry out in August, and then go on, and the adults will persist through September, where they'll finally die after they reproduce. So I've described the insect to you. Let's go ahead and talk a little bit about the host plants and the damage they're going to do. This is what people are really concerned about. And unfortunately, as the saying goes, a picture does say 1,000 words. This was taken by my predecessor, Elizabeth Barnes, and you could see in this spot in northern Indiana, these trees are just completely defoliated. And you know it's the right time of year because if you look in the background, you can see trees that do have their leaves still. These are trees that are defoliated, that are damaged, and unfortunately will probably have to be removed because of how damaged they are. Trees can take defoliation 2 to 3 years in a row before finally their biologies can't keep up with that level of defoliation. They won't be able to survive another winter. Now, there is a large number of trees that spongy moth can be successful on, though they do very strongly tend to prefer oak. And again, like I said, they could take 2 to 3 seasons of defoliation. So if you have a tree that gets defoliated in one season, it will most likely recover in the next. However, repeated defoliations are what's ultimately going to kill the tree. And then as the trees are further damaged, you're going to see that disease pressure is also beginning to play a role in it. And overall, the health of the tree is going to go down. It's going to be vulnerable, and eventually it will die. Now here, this was published in an article by Dr. Cliff Sadoff, who just retired out of the Department of Entomology on Purdue's campus. This is a list of trees from least preferred to most preferred that you will see spongy moth on. And if you start with the least preferred trees or plants, you'll see they will go after ash, black locust, dogwood, lilacs, viburnum. A lot of these are ones that we love. Ash in particular is one that's difficult to deal with because ash already suffers problems with emerald ash borer. I'm kind of sad. I love dogwoods, and they attack those. If we move on to our somewhat preferred, you can see there are a few unique trees in there. In particular, notice we have black walnut, which is a valuable veneer wood tree that we grow in Indiana. Elm, which has already suffered plenty from Dutch elm disease throughout the last century, as well as maples, plums, sassafras, and others. And then the most preferred, we're moving on now to American beech, which will soon be having problems with beech leaf disease. Oaks, which is their most preferred host, along with sweet gum, serviceberry, and white pine, which are all trees that are often good native replacements for invasives or something to replant. Not a good story to hear. So what we're doing now is that the state is conducting a slow the spread program where they're working with landowners and others in an effort to try to slow the spread of this insect through different chemical methods. And these don't necessarily mean you're spraying an insecticide to kill this insect. There are a few different options that can be used here. So most of this work is being done by the Department of Natural Resources, specifically their Division of Entomology and Plant Pathology. Unfortunately, it's not possible to eradicate this insect out of Indiana anymore. It's very established. It's a part of the ecology, particularly in northern Indiana now. And we also find that since females cannot fly, you can only spread larvae through ballooning, which means a lot of its spread is either through wind dispersal or jump dispersal due to human activity, i.e. we drive our vehicles through these areas, we move firewood in and out of these areas, all kinds of stuff. So that campaign of don't move the firewood that you've been seeing the last 15 years is just as true now as it was back when emerald ash borer first got here and we first started saying that. So limiting the spread of this insect is going to take a lot of work in how we treat it and change how we approach it. So one of those approaches that we can use is something I mentioned before called banding. This is actually a really neat way that we use the insect's own biology against it to be able to contain it and try to reduce its numbers somewhat. So I mentioned this earlier, spongy moth caterpillars like to move up and down the trunk of a host plant trying to find harborage during temperature changes. So they want to avoid either cooking in the sun or avoid getting too cold. Maybe they're even trying to avoid predators at certain times of the day. What you could do is attach a band of folded burlap where the larva is going to crawl into the folds as they move up and down the tree, and they're going to stop there. They're going to be confused as to where they're going. And then you could take that burlap and you could sink it into a bucket of soapy water or what have you and able to destroy the larva and then just reband the tree. It's a handy tactic. Unfortunately, it's not an end-all be-all. It is a challenge to try to keep up with them, but it is one way you can reduce those numbers. You can actually find a lot of diagrams written in that publication by Cliff Sadoff, and I want to encourage everyone to look at it. You're watching this on YouTube, which means if you pause the screen right here, you can copy down that URL for the publication and be able to look it up at a later date, and I'll also try to put it in the description underneath this video. There's also plenty of diagrams and other discussions of host species, all sorts of things, so I encourage you all to look this up. Now, as for chemical treatments, this is where things get a little interesting. We just don't willy-nilly spray insect killer around to try to handle this. We have a few different options. One of those options is an idea called mating disruption. What this is again, it uses the biology of the moth against it. Spongy moths locate mates through pheromone communication. So what if we can replicate that pheromone and then completely fill an area with it? Imagine trying to find a smoker in a room full of smokers. You can't. It's too difficult. The room's filled with smoke. You can't see very well, too. The same rule applies here. If you fill an area with the mating disruption synthetic pheromone, you've effectively blinded males from being able to find a female, thus reducing their fecundity, their ability to breed and lay eggs and continue the next generation. Now, this isn't something you're going to do in your backyard. This is something that's done on a landscape scale, handled by government agencies, namely the Indiana DNR conducts this work each year. And they do so in with a lot of public knowledge on it. I'm actually going to show you a little bit about how they inform the public with their activities. Another option that we have is the use of a BT product, BT named for Bacillus thuringiensis. This is a protein that was derived from that bacteria, and what it does is it destroys the gut, the internal digestive system of an insect, and makes it so that it can't eat and it will eventually die. Spongy moths are sensitive to it, so we will apply that pesticide to trees where the caterpillars are active. The caterpillars will then consume that material and eventually die. This is one of the safest pesticides you can use. It can't impact humans. We actually are exposed to products that have had BT applied to them every day. So it's not something that's easily avoided. You have already been exposed to it, most likely. And thankfully, it's actually very, very safe. Humans and animals lack the biochemical machinery for this insecticide to have an effect on you. It is very, very specific. So that is good. It is not, again, a perfect solution, though. It will not have a complete kill of spongy moths, so we have to repeatedly use it and hopefully try to do so in such a way that won't generate resistance. So DNR, when they make their applications, are very judicious about where and when they are going to apply it. And of course, one of the big questions that I will hear very often is, are pollinators going to be at risk from this product? Well, for one, the risk is low because pollinators need to be present. So a lot of these trees, they may not have the kind of flowers that pollinators are going to be interested in. They may be in other places. There could be potential for beehives and other things to be in the wild in trees, but again, DNR does a lot of ground truthing and other work to make sure that they are not going to do that. So most likely, if bees are present, they have already been removed. Mating disruption is species specific. It can't do anything to anything else. You would have to be a spongy moth. And the great thing is that the mating disruption chemical they use is fully biodegradable. It will be put in kind of a little food wafer kind of thing. That's where the insects will find it, and it won't remain in the environment. And if you use BTK, that's the formulation of BT that's used for spongy moth, it's applied to leaf material, which means in order for the insect to get it, they need to be eating that leaf material, and it has to get into their digestive system. And again, it's really mostly effective with caterpillars, moth species. It doesn't really impact other things as well. So of course, we will ask the question, where do we go from here? Well, first we need to understand what is currently going on. So this map, it is a little bit dated. So this was just prior to 2023. So this was probably created after the 2022 application year for this. Only a small set of northern counties currently has an infestation. Now, spongy moth does escape out of its infestation, though most often we see males, flighted males, escaping out where it's not necessarily pregnant females. The DNR and Purdue University work together to enact the suppression program. This video you're watching right now is a part of that. I am helping educate you on what is going on, so that way you're an informed Hoosier as to what this insect is doing in our state. But it is important to remember that spongy moth is here to stay. There isn't a way to eradicate it out of our state, but what we can do is try to slow its spread into other places. So this is a 2022 map of the catch that DNR put out, the traps they had set up to try to monitor and catch this insect. And it's showing you that obviously the counties that have the biggest infestation, those northernmost counties, the numbers in the traps are in the hundreds, whereas in other counties, you could see the numbers are really, really low. These are mainly instances probably of males flying far from the infestation area. Maybe some ballooning happened, but not established infestation. So the infestation is being contained at the moment, though we are ever watchful for a new infestation to start up outside of that quarantined area. So I kind of got ahead of myself here a little bit, but one thing that I do want to emphasize is that human activity is almost certainly the #1 method for the spread of this insect. Monitoring your firewood, please burn it where you buy it. Checking your vehicles if you drive through infested areas. I've actually gotten the habit now where if I drive my car through, I will check it before I leave that county to make sure that I didn't bring an egg mass or something with me. Now, I mentioned earlier I want to make sure that you know how the DNR keeps this information public and accessible for Hoosiers. They have a website up. You can actually just type in Google DNR and spongy moth, and it will take you straight to their treatment areas planned for 2024. This is what it looks like. This is currently what they're planning on doing. So Adams and Wabash counties, there are going to be 2 areas that are going to have an application of 4A, which is a BTK product. And then you could see in Allen, Huntington, Whitley, Stark, and Wayne counties, they are going to get applications of Splat GM, which is a mating disruption application. And here I'm just highlighting them so you could see them a little bit better. Now, here is what happened in 2023. These were the proposed treatment areas that did happen in 2023. So the one marked in red, the little red box, is where BTK was applied. And the blue boxes are where mating disruption pheromones were released. In 2024, those proposed areas, there are a couple more. So we've got 2 that are marked there with Winona and Roanoke. Those are going to be mating disruption. There's another one further south in Wayne County marked as Richmond. That's going to be another mating disruption application. And then you could see in Wabash and Adams counties, you see North Manchester, that's going to be an application of BTK, as well as the Burn application over in Adams County. So one of the things that I always like to do is to make sure that you understand what you can do to try to help with the management of this insect. Thankfully, this is fairly simple. Report it. You've now learned of the biology of this insect. You've learned what it's doing in Indiana. We want you to report it if you see it. You know what it looks like. I want you to promote some good tree health. Trees that are healthy, that don't have disease issues, those trees are going to be able to resist infestation. They're going to be able to recover from it. And you're going to be monitoring them. And again, please do not move firewood or other raw wood products. If you do so, honestly, don't. Just burn it where you get it. If you're a part of a business, please be responsible and check everything you're doing and communicate with all your requisite agencies. And with that, that is all I've got time for today. So I just want to encourage everybody that if you do see spongy moth or any number of invasives, please call 1-866-NO-EXOTIC, the number you see in front of you right now. You can also reach me at rfbruner@purdue.edu if you have particular questions. And then you can see I've also listed edmaps.org and glidden.org. These are places where you can report sightings of insects, and it will be added to a map that's easily accessible by the general public. And with that, thank you everybody for listening. Keep your eyes open for this insect, and I will catch you at the next one.